I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Election security and election integrity is top of mind for a lot of folks as we get closer to November 5th. Today we heard from federal officials who say, yes, there are a lot of threats to our election security out there, both domestically and from bad guys in other countries. But they argue our election infrastructure has never been more secure. And that is our big story tonight. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, the federal government's newest agency, is housed in the Department of Homeland Security. They work on protecting the government's cyber infrastructure. They also work to protect the power grid, communication systems, and election systems. CISA was created in 2018 after Russia interference in the 2016 election. They say there were two main threats to our elections now: cyber attacks from other countries and in-person attacks here in the U.S.
You have cyber threats like ransomware and distributed denial of service attacks on websites. We have very real threats from our foreign adversaries, Russia, Iran, and China, who remain intent on using influence operations and disinformation for two key goals. They want to undermine American confidence in our election processes and in our democracy even broader. And then secondly, to sow partisan discord, to pit Americans against each other. And these operations are likely to continue after November 5th. Also very concerning, there are physical threats to election officials: swatting, harassment, bullying, threats of violence to election officials and their families, largely stemming from unfounded claims that the 2020 election did not represent the will of the American people.
Now, we contacted the Oregon Secretary of State's office today. They say our state has seen a high volume of threats this year: calls, social media posts, and emails harassing and threatening violence against election workers. But they say this year those threats have not escalated into actual in-person violence, thank heavens, the way that some did in 2020. They're working with CISA on safety training for election workers across Oregon, as well as local and federal law enforcement. 2 years ago, Oregon passed the Election Worker Safety Bill, which creates penalties for those threatening or harassing election workers. Issues with cybersecurity that could affect the election are happening across the country. Just today, in fact, several national news outlets reported that Chinese hackers targeted data from phones used by former President Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. They say it's part of what appears to be wide-ranging efforts to collect intelligence on the candidates. The FBI and CISA issued a joint statement saying they are investigating. But the director of CISA says that although attacks like these will continue, U.S. elections officials have systems in place to protect your vote, like ballot counting machines that are not connected to the internet.
Election officials have put in place multiple layers of safeguards, physical access controls, cybersecurity protections to prevent election infrastructure from being compromised. And these include pre-election testing of equipment for accuracy and post-election audits. Finally, it's important to remember that every state runs things a little bit differently: different equipment, different processes. And this decentralized and diverse nature of our election infrastructure actually creates enormous strength and resilience, because it means it's not possible for a malicious actor to hack into our voting infrastructure in a way where you could have a material impact on the outcome of the presidential election, certainly not without being detected.
Well, that's interesting and reassuring. Easterly says they've done hundreds of cybersecurity assessments and election safety trainings across the country. They've posted many of those resources online, by the way, at CISA.gov if you want a deeper dive for yourself. And she says workers at your local elections office are prepared for all kinds of problems, everything from power outages to bomb threats. Speaking of elections, one person not running for election is Portland's outgoing Mayor Ted Wheeler. Last night, he gave his final State of the City talk. He said that after 8 years as mayor, he's burned out. He does not have the energy needed for another term. He also wants to spend more time with his daughter. Okay, now I know a good number of you do not live in the Portland area, but hold on. Wheeler headed the city for 2 terms, and it's the economic engine for our area, so odds are you did feel the impact in some form or fashion. That's why I know you'll be as interested as I am in some of his comments. First off, he said, being mayor of Portland, actually is very hard.
Several of my closest friends said, don't do it. And I remember one in particular saying, Portland devours its mayors. That has stuck with me all of these years. But I did it anyway, just like you guys are doing it anyway. I felt compelled, in fact, to step forward. I saw the city's potential, and I believed I had something to provide to the community in terms of helping us overcome these challenges that we were facing at that time. And just to show you how thick-skulled I am, I actually did it twice. But honestly, I feel like I was made for it. It wasn't always fun. It wasn't always easy. I wasn't always successful. I did some things right. I did some things wrong. There are things I would do over and do completely differently if I could actually turn the clock back, but you can't. But I believe I was made for this. And in particular, one characteristic that a Portland mayor needs, in addition to an ironclad sense of humor, is resilience. My 3 expeditions to Mount Everest, snowshoeing to the North Pole, participating in many full-length Ironman races, I think helped build that sense of fortitude and resilience. But I can honestly tell you this, summiting Mount Everest, it is a cakewalk compared to being mayor of Portland. It is a cakewalk.
Wheeler had held elected office before as the Multnomah County Chair and then the Oregon State Treasurer. Some thought he was destined to go on one day to be Oregon Governor. But now he says no, he's done with elected office. He talked about the riots of 2020 and noted the threats against himself and his family during that time. Later, the mayor highlighted specialty groups created during his tenure to try and stop gun violence. And he criticized men for shooting each other over petty issues.
And then I'm just going to say this, folks. There's not everything. Government can't do it all. We are seeing too many cases, and dudes, I'm talking to you right now. Too many cases where men, because that's who's doing this, where men are resolving petty conflicts with firearms. And we just had this ridiculous situation where 2 dads are going to the school pickup line, and they got over some dispute over, apparently, I guess, who was first in the pickup line, and shots were fired, and somebody was shot. And then in Gresham, and I realize it's not part of our statistics, but in Gresham, somebody's car stereo was allegedly a little bit too loud, so they had a shootout. We need to learn to resolve conflict in ways that are not so violent. Accountability matters too, and I hear from a lot of people, they say, look, I like the cops, but they have the ability to use lethal force. We need some accountability. For decades, we dithered around on body-worn cameras. I said on my first day, before I leave, police officers in this city will have body-worn cameras, and they do now. And that's all the way from the new sworn in, all the way up to the police chief. Anybody who intervenes with the public will have a body-worn camera.
And finally, Ted Wheeler said he feels good about the progress made on the homeless issue, especially the work done by the city over the last 2 years.
And the whole point isn't just to get people to live in a shelter. The point is to get them into the shelter, connect them with services, then navigate them to housing that's reserved for that population. So they're off the streets and they can reclaim their lives, move on with their lives, and not be one of our statistics. And so what we did is every single person who comes into one of those sites today is navigated to services. Drug addiction, mental health services, job training services, domestic violence survivorship services, housing, whatever they need to get off and stay off the streets. And thanks to the work of others like Dan Ryan and the SRVs, we're now going back. We're retooling the SRVs. We're connecting them to the navigation of services. We're expanding some of the sites like Reedway, as well as Multnomah Village. And I feel really good about where we are today because it contrasts with what I walked into in 2017 when the city of Portland did not directly operate even one emergency shelter bed. As of June of 2022, we went from 0 to now operating 9 city shelters, including large-scale task sites. And folks, I am pleased to announce that next Monday we will officially open our 10th large-scale shelter site on North Portland Road, which will offer 70 RV spots as well as 90 sleeping pods. So what this means is in just over a 2-year period, the city of Portland has opened 868 sleeping units, all of which are connecting people to services they need for whatever their specific suite of issues may be. And we have navigated.
Ted Wheeler said he'd like to hang around a little bit after the first of the year to help the new mayor and the city council get a good start. While we're on the topic of the city of Portland, new polling appears to show public perception of downtown is trending finally in the right direction after cratering these past few years. And on a larger scale, there's improved numbers on whether or not people believe the city is headed in the right direction. This data comes from a new poll commissioned by the Oregonian, and we think it's worth your time. Here's the article. More residents now say Portland area is on the right track, the Oregonian's poll finds. The reporter who broke down the numbers from the poll is relatively new to the area, and we got a chance to chat with them about their takeaways this afternoon.
I don't want to overstate the case here. The percentage of people who think that Portland is heading in the right direction is still well below the historical average. But I think what we saw was that perceptions of Portland were really cratering, maybe especially 2021, 2022. And I think our polling was showing that it's kind of starting to have an uptick. So in 2022, only 9% of people thought the Portland area was heading in the right direction. And now 27% of people do, which is still only about a quarter, but it's a lot better. And so I think we were seeing some indications like that of slight improvements in hopefulness throughout the poll.
The poll was done by Portland-based DHM Research over 5 days earlier this month. They talked with 600 Tri-County residents, 300 of which live in Portland. Here's what the numbers show when it comes to downtown perception. 75% have a negative view of downtown. That did not change much from the April poll, which was 78%. But a noteworthy change does come deeper in the data. 38% of those polled had a very negative impression of downtown back in April. That number was back at way up at 51%. So 51, now it's all the way down to 38%.
Of course, a big majority of people still had a negative view of downtown, and there wasn't a big shift there. But I think what was significant was seeing that fewer people had a very negative view. Because, people aren't going to switch their minds about how downtown Portland is doing overnight, right? But edging from that very negative into somewhat negative, which is what we saw between April and October, kind of indicates that people are beginning to warm up to the area again.
By the way, if you'd like to take a look at the rest of the data, check out this article and several others that have been published on the topic over the last few days over on OregonLive.com. In the meantime, we'd love to hear what you think about downtown Portland. Have you noticed any improvement over the past 6 months? Have you been there? You should check it out. Let us know, will you? Email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. Coming up next on The Story, a special preview of this weekend's Straight Talk with Laurel Porter, where the two candidates in Oregon's closest congressional race face off. Representative Lori Chavez DeReamer and Janelle Bynum. You'll hear from both of them next when The Story returns. This weekend on Straight Talk with Laurel Porter, Oregon's 5th congressional district race, super interesting. Lori Chavez-DeRemer flipped the seat for Republicans 2 years ago, but can she hold on to it against challenger Janelle Bynum? One of the topics Laurel is asking about came up on a political ad fact check that we did here on The Story.
Well, I'm so glad that this channel did do that fact check, because that was just an outright lie by my opponent. I have never taken a vote to dismantle Social Security or Medicare. Actually, I have made sure I signed on to the Social Security Fairness Act to protect what Americans and Oregonians have paid into that. And again, that was an attack ad by my opponent that's gone across the nation to take away from her record.
On the other side, Janelle Bynum addressed claims that she wants to defund police.
Well, I think as a mom and a wife, we experience, and an African American, we experience law enforcement a little bit differently. And my goal is to make sure that every Oregonian, every citizen in this state, every person that crosses our boundaries has a fair and legitimate experience with the best and the brightest people who wear our badge. And I believe that what's important is that when you call the police, as a business owner, when I call the police, I need them to show up. So this idea of defund the police was something I never supported. And I think it's just a political ploy to take people's eyes off of the fact that Lori Chavez-DeRemer supports someone who has credibly been accused of sexual assault and flouts the law regularly, Donald Trump.
You can catch the full conversation with both candidates, and you should, Saturday, 8:30 p.m., Sunday, 9, or Monday at 7 p.m. right here on KGW. Or you can watch anytime on our KGW YouTube channel or the KGW Plus app. Coming up next on The Story, it's a strategy the Democrats have used for quite a while now to boost voter turnout: ballot harvesting. Kind of sounds bad, but actually it's not. And now Republicans are getting on board after calling it cheating just a few years ago. We'll explain when The Story returns. You've probably heard the phrase, if you can't beat them, join them. And now some Republicans in the state of Washington are doing exactly that. No, they're not joining the Democrats, but they are using a strategy the Dems have long used to boost voter turnout. It's called ballot harvesting. It certainly sounds sinister, I know, but it's not. Republicans called the practice cheating, though, after the 2020 election, but now they're doing it too, because it works. Chris Ingalls reports.
This is the oldest black church in the state of Washington.
A house of faith, a place in history. First AME Church in Seattle is Washington's first black church, 138 years old. 20-year pastor Kerry Anderson says activism in the church is just as old.
This is what we do as a church and people of faith.
Especially come election time.
We're having on the first Sunday in November, November 3rd, Bring Your Ballot to Church Sunday.
On that day, he hopes the pews will be filled with people holding their completed election ballots, ready to turn them in.
We've been doing this from the time of our inception of being able to vote. And so this has always been a part of our history, a part of our culture, and it's a part of our spiritual DNA.
Democrats' ballot harvesting, where a designated person or group collects ballots and turns them into the elections office, works so well that Republicans are jumping in.
We are ballot harvesting. We are helping, encouraging, and collecting and delivering, if need be, ballots of voters.
Party Chairman Jim Walsh says this Sunday is the Republicans' Take Your Ballot to Church Day. Some Republican-friendly businesses are also putting out collection boxes.
Those boxes will be at churches, at some gun shops, at places where conservative people often gather. And it's a convenience.
Westgate Chapel in Edmonds is one of the churches working with the GOP that will have a ballot collection box out this Sunday. The church declined an interview with King 5.
This is organized crime.
Do you have video evidence?
4 million minutes of surveillance video around the country.
Donald Trump's false claims of a stolen election in 2020
This mule went across 6 counties to 27 different drop boxes.
were bolstered by now debunked documentaries and conspiracy theories that called ballot harvesting cheating by the Democrats.
Ballot harvesting was a curse word among the Republican Party. Why the switch?
Because we want to win. And we think that increasing voter turnout will help us win.
Republicans push to outlaw ballot harvesting in some states. In Washington, elections officials say it's legal as long as the registered owner who received the ballot is the one who fills it out.
It's who you're comfortable giving your ballot to. If you're comfortable handing your ballot to someone and you trust that they're going to turn it in for you, then there's no problem with that.
That's super interesting. Now, this is not just happening in Washington. Nationwide, Republican leaders are encouraging early voting, and it does seem to be making a difference. In the swing state of Nevada, for example, there are reports this week that more Republicans voted early than Democrats. And Republicans acknowledge that discouraging early voting in 2020 actually hurt their party. And by the way, the ballot boxes in churches that you saw, they're not the official ballot collection boxes. The idea is that church congregations are leaving their ballot with a trusted person within the church who can then deliver it to an elections office or an official drop box. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching and being with us. But remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. It just goes on and on. For those of you watching live on TV, Timbers 360 is coming your way next. And for the rest of you watching online, live, or later, don't forget that you can stream your story, the story, on your own schedule. Download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV, or find us anytime on the KGW YouTube channel. In the meantime, have a great weekend. I'll see you right back here on Monday night at 6:30.